Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the Dark Throne's goat lord of extreme metal podcasts. Underrated, I think.
Yeah.
I am the death metal guy, aka practicing Asatru by using a drinking horn at Wacken.
And I am the black metal guy, aka Neidhart von Royenthal, Master Minnesanger of Bavaria.
Would he use a drinking horn at Wacken?
If he was past the drinking horn, he would surely imbibe.
There's a couple guys in my local scene who use the drinking horn, and I've always found it so absurd because it's like they get a beer from the bar and then they have to do the process where they take out the drinking horn, pour the beer into it.
No. I mean, I feel like at the right at the right setting, maybe. You know what I mean? Or like if you can just pass it to the bar wench and have her fill
up your horn, yeah.
That seems like some bartenders would be down. But like that's just like going to the local metal bar to see, as you say, a band that sounds like death metal and Pantera. So not really time to bust out the horn.
Oh, but that's part of the kit, you know. They have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Greater Terminus Co-Prosperity Sphere, we had a weird point of intersection here. Because, do you want to tell the story of this first part?
Oh, yeah, no. I was just on Bandcamp, and I saw this... And I saw this grindcore. I guess this is a grindcore full length in a way, you know, or grindcore EP. And the name rang a bell for a couple reasons, and like I felt like TDMG may have mentioned them, but also the band has a name that I almost used for a kind of crusty, sludgy, grindy band many years ago. And it was Active Shooter. And, so I pussied out, but these guys, I pussied out because, you know, that was just when it was getting hard to get gigs on the punk scene if you had the wrong kind of name.
Yeah.
But that name would have been excessively punk for the punk scene. But I'm certainly glad these guys have done it, and it's the music is pretty cool too. And I said, death metal guy, look, it's Active Shooter, and he was like, take it away.
Oh! I'm supposed to just jump in there. Okay. I was like, yeah. Oh yeah, Active Shooter. They're friends of mine. I had a buddy that moved into the area over there who regularly plays shows with Active Shooter. I see his posts on Facebook a lot. So I was like, oh, this is cool. And I've never actually listened to them, but I'm interested to hear it based on your recommendation that it's good shit. So I think we're just going to listen to like the first 3 tracks off this EP, right?
Well, yeah, what I want you to do is tell me what kind of grindcore this is. I think, as far as I can tell, this is grindcore made by people who listen to a lot of metal, and not just, like, the death metal you would expect death grind people to listen to.
Okay.
But, yeah.
So we're going to listen to a sequence of 3 tracks. Don't worry, it's only about 2 minutes. It's an intro into Urban Decay and Anadonia. So let's check these guys out.
Why doesn't all grind sound like that?
Well, I mean, the secret is a lot of it does. You know, I mean, you were asking before we got started. Who does it sound like? And we're gonna have to go to the same city as Active Shooter, to one of secretly the most important grind bands in the U.S. in terms of their influence. Have you ever listened to PLF?
Puppy Liberation Front?
Well, no, originally it stood for Pretty Little Flower, and then they say it stands for Pulverizing Lethal Force, but ultimately it's PLF is whatever it means at any given time.
Yeah, like MDC. Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, PLF is a grind band from Houston. They've been around since '99, and I've heard a few of their records, and it's really good. I know what you mean by like it's interesting because it almost reads to me as though metal guys making a crustier style of grindcore than they typically would, when the opposite is what you see more often, you know?
Yeah, that's what interested me. It's like, I mean, because this sounds, I mean, in some sense, this sounds a lot like Revenge, but like, it's like people make, it's like, yeah, I was thinking it's like a grind guys who really, really understand Revenge making grind, but maybe it could be the other way around, because this to me seems the opposite of, there are all these fake war metal bands by like crusty dudes, right? Mm-hmm. And it all just sounds like it's all this sort of meticulous attempt to imitate surface details of Revenge that just make it sound kind of like grindcore, but doesn't really grind any more than it did in the first place, and it just sucks, right? Whereas this is like people who are using grindcore format, but incorporating that kind of like, this kind of like noisy guitar, Kerry King dive bomb shit. It sounds like they could listen to shit like, I've been obsessed with Ares Kingdom lately, but also just like Angel Corpse and stuff like that. Like really
I can see that.
Angry martial American thrash.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't really know that much about PLF personally. I mean, I think they're one of those bands that's like the most metal side of their hardcore scene. You know?
Yeah.
But clearly these guys are like right down the middle as far as what they listen to. And then if you like that, I'm sure you've heard them before, but I would recommend going back to Phobia. That would be a good one.
Oh, yeah, I'll have to. I don't know them well. See, this is the thing, is that this sounds crusty, right? Like that intro track sounded very crusty, right? That could have been like Amoebix or something. But it doesn't sound like most of the crust grind that I know, which is highly rooted in like chunky D-beat stuff and Napalm Death and whatever, right?
Oh, I would definitely recommend Phobia is worth going back to then. Phobia, good guys, very good live shows, fun 15-minute full lengths, very good band overall.
Sounds good.
All right, so with that journey south, let's go even further south. So I've made an effort on the show as of late to try to bring up like the South American and Mexican metal scenes a lot more. Last week on the show, we covered the wonderful debut record by Tiradero de Cadáveres, which I realize you translated, that means corpse dump. Holy fuck, dude.
Yeah. And I was trying to think like, yeah, no, that shit is too real, right?
Yeah, that's nasty. I like that.
There's interestingly, right, so that's clearly just about the place where the cartels go to throw the bodies, but like, it picks up, there's some resonance there with, like Anglo-Saxon or something. You could say the corpse mound or the corpse hill.
Yeah.
Right? There's an Amoebix lyric like, upon the corpse hill of the slain. Right? And so there's this, like so much of the cartel shit, there's just this ancient stuff resurfacing in these unexpected ways.
Definitely. So YouTube happened to recommend me through the algorithm, and probably by listening to my phone and through the chip implanted in my head, the Mexico Black Metal Fest, which was a live stream festival featuring all Mexican black metal bands, and then, some other stuff sneaks in there, some stuff that's a little more death metal or a little proggier, but it's centering around black metal. And I watched a few bands off it, and I really have a love of exploring local scenes, because these are all small bands. There's not any huge headliners or anything. It's everybody getting together and recording to be able to pull off this live stream. All right, so before we go on to our rundown, real quick, social media, follow us. Death Metal Guy on Facebook at Terminus Podcast, or the Black Metal Guy on Instagram at Terminus Extreme Metal, but you all already know that. But if you really want to support us, then you got to give us the 16 digits of your credit card, the expiration date, month and year, and the 3 digits on the back for the security code. And you can do that at either Patreon or Subscribestar. $3 and up gets you access to all of the Terminus Prime bonus episodes, the newest of which we're going to be uploading right around now when you're hearing this.
I know.
Yeah, we should upload
I'm a little
that.
behind on that. Yeah.
We should make it worth it for people to
Yes.
buy it, to buy our feelings. And $5 and up gets you access to the Terminus Prime, or not the Terminus Prime, but the Terminus Black Circle. Sorry, I've done this so many times, I get jumbled now.
Fair enough.
But you get invited to the Terminus Black Circle, our private Discord server, where we discuss the finer points of abstract German black metal, and I take fun polls to see what you guys would like to hear more of on the show. So, well, I did that for the first time today, just to...
Oh, you took a poll? That's nice.
Kind of, informally. It's just like, hey, what have you guys really liked off our show that, you didn't introduce us to or you didn't know already, that kind of thing. Get a...
Nice.
Doing some market research.
Also, the new bonus is responsive to fan requests for deep dives on scenes.
Yes, we are. If you want to really commit to that parasocial relationship, giving us money is the best way to do that. I will pretend to be your friend plenty if you do that.
I'll pretend to be your girlfriend.
That's fair. I'll do that too. I don't give a shit. We're gonna start up the OnlyFans soon. All right. So what do we got today? I think we're not. Oh, we're doing the full mix up today, I believe.
Yes. All right.
But you're starting us off. What do we got?
Starting off with some highly sword-oriented black metal from Hanternoz.
Full hashtag Swordboy Summer.
Swordboy Summer. This is off. This is Au Fleuve de Loire. Sorry, I took a sec to recalibrate from Swordboy Summer. And it's on Antiq Records. Hanternoz is a band of the guy who you may know from Vehemence. And Antiq is the label that he runs that puts out related stuff in this French chivalric cluster.
All right. And then...
Oh, wait, and I've also got the next one. Right?
Oh, wait, it is split in half. So I forgot. We messed around with the format this time. So.
We just went for the brutal split. Yeah, so this next one is something in Cyrillic. And if you put that in Latin, you can pronounce it as something like Aza Solncem Luna, and which translates to "and beyond the sun, the moon." And the title of the record is "On a Broom to the Stars," and it's a Russian band, and it's out on Hexen Cave Productions, which is an excellent sort of Slovak label that does a lot of, Eastern European stuff. And we've covered some stuff before from them. And yeah, so that's this, and this is a Slavic take on nocturnal symphonic black metal.
All right. So my half, mine was kind of abrupt. I had a couple records that I planned on featuring, and release dates for both of them got pushed at the last minute, which meant I needed to scramble a little bit, so I just found some interesting stuff that might be relevant to our listeners. So first up, I have the second full-length by Genune, a little bit unsure of the pronunciation, but the record is called Inert and Unerring. This was released on Loud Rage Music, which is a Romanian label that specializes in a lot of different kinds of rock and metal, but seems to be mostly focused on Romanian regional scene stuff. This is a post-black record that I found interesting, and I figured we could kind of follow the line from a record like the Searcher line that you brought on the other day, and to start exploring, okay, what makes post-black metal tick or not, depending on the record. And then wrapping things up, another last-minute pick, I figured we would revisit the legendary Clandestine Blaze with Secrets of Laceration. I believe this is Clandestine's 11th full-length record, which is fucking crazy to think, because we started listening to this music when he only had like 2 or 3 under his belt.
That's probably true, yeah.
Yeah, and of course this is released on Northern Heritage, Mikko Aspa's label, as has every previous Clandestine Blaze record, so this is going to be kind of a deep cut thing for the serious Terminus listeners.
Home label
what?
of the home label of the infamous Migla.
Hey, remember Mikko was the guy to give Migla their first big push. We always forget about that, and I know. I think that might become surprisingly relevant on this new Clandestine Blaze, but we'll get around to that.
What's that I hear? Rolling down from the mountains. Could it be? A spring torrent of autism. Hailing the soundtrack to Swordboy Summer. Hashtag Swordboy Summer.
That's going to be our new thing, is just like slipping in the hashtag all the time.
And as it descends from the mountains, the torrent turns into the majestic Loire River, which is the centerpiece of this record by Hanternoz. Out now on Antiq. So, Hanternoz, you probably don't pronounce the H too much. Hanternoz is this band has been around for a while. They started out with a full length and then did intermittent shorter releases, and this is only the second full length. This is a long-running sort of two-parted collaboration. I think a very even-handed collaboration, kind of like that band Saganland. Between Hyvermor, who runs Antiq, and Sparda, who's in a couple bands that I don't know, and I should try to mention what those are at some point. But Hyvermor, is the band he's best known for is Vehemence, which is just really outstanding French chivalric black metal. I remember I told you you'd like them, and you finally checked them out.
Huge recommendation for me. Yeah, 100%.
Yes, and you can hear some of that here, but it's a very different take. And he's also got this really weird kind of band that's basically not like folk black metal, but more like black metal informed kind of psychedelic medieval folk. It's called Grylle, Grylle. That has like crazy illuminated manuscript monsters all over the art and shit.
That's pretty awesome.
Cool. Yeah, strongly recommend looking up this guy's Metal Archives picture. Back in the day, he had like the sort of like Prince Valiant haircut, and like he just completely goes for it. Like total commitment to the medieval aesthetic. So, should talk briefly about the scene. So on this show, we talk about how many French black metal scenes there really are, right? And in terms of the chivalric black metal scene, you can trace the roots back to things like, in terms of sonic stuff, you can find precedent in Hirelorn and Seigneur Voland and things like that. Bekira, Osculum, those kinds of bands. But those are all a little more sort of, raw, sinister, kind of stuff. This is, as it exists today, has more sort of polished production, musicianship, intense musicianship. And Antiq is one of the main linchpins of this scene. So there are other bands in that constellation on this label. It's based in Angers. I don't really know how to pronounce that, but and it's in the region called Pays de la Loire, so it's the the country or the the fields of the Loire River, and it's between Bretagne, which we call Brittany, Anglos, and Anjou. So it's Brittany is this coastal region where a sort of basically a heavily Celtic variant of French is spoken. Basically a different language.
Yeah.
Right? Breton. And, it's on the it's on the coast of the Atlantic and the English Channel.
Well, that's why they describe them as, like, the Bretons, as a distinct from the Franks back in the day.
Exactly, yes. Remnant Gauls, maybe. And so Anjou, more central France. And so I stress this because, like, the French chivalric scene has this very regional quality to it, and often exists in kind of like regional or peripheral France. Like, it's not coming from Paris, right? In large part. And in part, I think that's because these places were like more distinct political entities in the Middle Ages, right? Like, Brittany was a more distinct region, right? And the other big location for this scene is Occitania, these regions of southern France that used to speak, again, a different language called Languedoc. And that's the country where a lot of things we associate with the French Middle Ages, like the troubadours, the warrior poets, were from. And that's the big band that I always talk about from there is Our Lock, who really kind of started this sound. And Darkenhold, who I don't like as much, but they belong on the list. And people who like proggier stuff might like them. And actually, the guy Spellbound, the vocalist from Our Lack, is guesting on this record. So these scenes are all kind of connected. As far as distinguishing where this band is at, right? Vehemence is this classically chivalric stuff, right? It's got the chording, it's very different musically from the quote-unquote French black metal sound, or like the Seigneur Volant formula. It's based on leads, and it's got these sort of like flowery, cascading tremolades and arpeggios, and, it's literally about knights, right? Or as you might say, kind of like it's basically just like by knights, right? The character in Vehemence is the Vehemence character is a knight, and he's telling you about doing knightly deeds. They have like a great one called like The Last Cavalry Charge. So in contrast to that, Hanternoz is much more earthy. And Vehemence is high intensity, but Hanternoz is like brutal. Vehemence is very centered in sort of a heavy metal inflected black metal. Hanternoz is kind of like sort of much more rough, simple forms, kind of like brutal folkblack, very stompy at times. And they call it pagan black metal, which we can try to explain later maybe. But and you can hear these links to things like Windir and Crota, but there's a thematic link too, and maybe I'll get into that later because I've done enough talking now. But Death Metal Guy, what did you think of this?
This is a fun record. This is interesting. So obviously we talk about this as being descended in part from the sort of chivalric French black metal scene, but I would say what this really strikes me as is a perfect midpoint between the chivalric scene and the more like ruralist peasant French black metal as typified by something like Peste Noire. I think that a lot of people who listen to this are going to hear a lot of Peste Noire on it. I think they're mostly incorrect, but I get where they're coming from. But not really as a point of argument, but maybe something that I would address a little bit more specifically. I think there's a ton of heavy metal on this record. And because you'd said it's less heavy metal than Vehemence, which is like true, but in a different way. The heavy metal. Oh, go ahead.
It might be equally heavy metal. To be fair, I guess I was trying to say mostly that Vehemence is much more black metal, and much more sort of it has the elaborate qualities of heavy metal.
Yeah,
right. The sort of technical showmanship, flamboyance, lots of things happening.
Yeah, this is heavy metal, but in a different way, where I get a lot more of the sort of primitive heavy metal meets street punk stuff, like, say, the first couple Iron Maiden records, Manowar, at kind of their scuzziest. There's some of that in here. But I guess overall, I would say that to make people understand this record, I would call this a folk metal record first, before a black metal record. And, you know, the idea of folk metal unadorned has become this weird niche that it shouldn't be. You know, when people hear folk metal, you know, without any sort of adjunct to it, they're imagining stuff like Fintroll and Corpiclani or Illuviide, whatever, any of these fucking festival bands from the late 2000s. But there's a whole legacy of stuff that is informed by extreme metal, but is ultimately just centered around folk instrumentation from the late 90s into maybe the mid 2000s. The most obvious example being like Skyclad or something like that, which I feel this is. Yeah, I feel like
a guy from Skyclad guests on this. I think he plays.
Oh, really?
Sure. I'm pretty sure. Let me double check that.
Oh, I didn't even realize that.
Keep going. Yeah.
Well, no, so a band like Skyclad, I feel like ultimately this is probably closer musically to Skyclad than, say, any second wave black metal. So when we discuss this as a black folk record, don't get the idea that this is, you know, blast beats with folk melodies. This is extremely different.
Yeah. Oh, certainly, yeah. You would really want to distinguish it from sort of folkish black metal as defined by Arjan from Hidden's Heart, right? This is like Saganland has these melodies that have folk roots, kind of, or Asgrau, or these bands will just have folk shapes in the melodies, but it's musically, it's guitar-driven, riff-driven black metal. Odal, really good example of the old Odal, right? And we heard some actual folk metal on the new Odal last week, right? You were kind of making that case.
And I would say that this is like, there's not Dark Throne riffs in this, or Mayhem riffs.
No, for sure.
This is very bespoke. And what I was going to say is, in terms of what we cover on the show, that this is closest to, that apparently resonated with you, is Panakita.
For sure.
Did a wonderful record last year. Absolutely outstanding record that we covered on the show. And I would read this as the French Panakita in many ways.
Yeah, well, I think Panakita, the songs are structurally more heavy metal. Mm-hmm. Like, they sort of have more kind of a verse-chorus vibe, more built around kind of, often kind of these rollicking, amped-up power metal kind of riffs, right? Which you get touches of that here, but they kind of move at these. There are big flourishes for clean vocals in a different way from here, where you've got kind of choruses following riffs. But I agree, they're very, very similar. I think particularly a lot of the riffing on here is very similar to when Panakita plays their black metal riffs, which are very strong. Those are very close to how Hanternoz does it. Lots of just, like, big, like, fortified power chords built around fourths and stuff that sound much more medieval. Shit like that.
Yeah, well, we've spent about 12 minutes talking about this album in the meta section. We should probably get some samples, shouldn't we?
All right. So, I suppose let's address this. So, yeah, exactly. What kind of... Everyone will be wanting to know, like, oh my god, what kind of folk music? What does it sound like? So, here is a sample that foregrounds that. I think your first sample kind of does, too. This is from... this is a very long record, which is awesome. It's, like, a very ambitious. It's over an hour. And this is from, I think, the second track. Hang on, I'm trying to pull this up. Third track. Yeah, it's the second, like, substantial track. This is Ce que le Fleuve a pris. And we're going to start out about just under 3 minutes in.
You just like power metal. You just like power metal.
I like it when it is used correctly.
I feel like we're gonna have a repeat of the same discussion over Paniquita, where I talk about how this is mostly like a heavy and power metal record at heart, you know?
Well, sure. I mean, that's obviously a heavy power metal style riff. I think what's interesting about it is that in a lot of power metal and in a lot of classic folk metal, you'd get a version of it that is much more based on like trope, quote unquote, Celtic sounds, or like Celtic meets Iron Maiden. So you might just get a version that's like right? And what sets this apart in part is like the really rapid turn on the end. That makes the guitars are working like you're pulling the guitars out of the territory of stock pedal point thrash stuff, and you're making them move a lot faster, kind of whiplash on the end, in a way that like sounds like bagpipes, like trills. And then, when the riff repeats, the second time, it doesn't drop a whole step like it did before. There's actually, it goes up. There's a chord change up, and there's a lovely embellishment on the melody at the end. What this guy really has is, what I love about this record is that so many of the riffs are very quote-unquote simple. They're simple, they're distinctive, and they sound like, in many ways, like, I mean, yeah, this in many ways does sound close to things we've heard in other bands, but like this guy, the guitarist has a voice, and he really has an ear for like combining the good parts of this like power metal, heavy metal stuff with actual folk music. I can say more about that, but you should say something first.
Oh, well, no, I was just going to say, I think that you hit on what makes this special is the adornment, the sort of embellishments everywhere, which is something we've come back to again and again, which is, you can use these very traditional sort of heavy metal arrangements, but you have to spruce them up somehow. You have to, even if it's something relatively minor, you have to constantly be developing these ideas in interesting ways. And I think that's one of the places these guys really succeed, is, a lot of, at least from riff to riff, chord structure-wise, this relies on the same sort of intervals you've heard before in traditional heavy metal, folk metal, power metal,
sure,
etc. But it's the embellishments, it's the sort of lush interpretation of them that makes them special and makes them more compelling, which I think is something that's underappreciated by a lot of people, because, on this show we talk about the idea of stock melodies. Well, stock melodies are fine if you're making them your own, and Hanternoz is a band who makes it their own all the time.
Yeah, and, the additional thing, like, you could be like a pretty damn good, say, power metal band, or a pretty damn good black metal band using power metal riffs, and play, you could take those metal riffs and throw in little adornments in various ways and make them your own, right? But the cool thing of it, the specifically cool thing that I think makes this a great band, is the way that he's like, because those things rely on these troped, flattened down inherited ideas of folk music, right? Filtered through Maiden, filtered through all this stuff, right? He can access the source of it. And so he's embellishing stock melodies, but he's also just actually working with the raw material that those stock melodies were built from in the first place. So, so the cool thing about this guy, right, is I think Hyvermor...
These guys, remember, it's a duo. Yeah.
It is a duo, and I assume that the other guy has a big hand of the songwriting. However, what I know is Hyvermor's work, and I know, like...
Okay, I gotcha.
I mean, yes, I seriously, like, yeah, the other guy has a band called Créatures and a band called Cataèdes, and I don't know either of these. So who I can talk about is the guy who's in Vehemence, but anyway, I think this is probably true for both of them, is like, there seems to be some study of medieval music here. If you listen to other bands around the Antiq, well, you can just hear in the melodies here, like the da 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 da. You can hear that melody, the big trem riff with the chorus over it in the middle. That's like French folk song melody. That's not normal metal. Like Vehemence uses it too. There's some study of like folk music and medieval music, but like it's also because there's like they're able to draw on the closest thing to living medieval music in Western Europe, probably, which is Breton folk, right? And because they're this Celtic people, the music is like pretty similar to stuff in the British Isles, to stuff, the Irish and Scottish stuff.
Yeah, I mean, like, nowadays people create this very strict differentiation between, stuff from the UK and French stuff, but historically there's been much more interchange than a lot of people recognize now.
Yeah, and relevant regions don't necessarily correspond to today's national boundaries, right? So, like, it's, so, the Breton folk musicians use bagpipes, and, like, they swap reels and song ideas with Irish and Scottish folk musicians all the time. They like, play at Celtic festivals. And so there's this, but, it is its distinct version of that, and, probably, and it's being brought into dialogue with stuff that sounds more classically French or more classically sort of medieval troubadour sounding, right? And so he's got this regionally specific language, this rich living tradition to draw from, and he can move sort of seamlessly from this kind of Celtic stuff, which has this, pentatonic Dorian feel, has this, noble barbarian feel, into this other kind of more knightly or folk song vibe. It's really, it all sounds epic as fuck. It all accesses this kind of the glory of bright primary color melody, but there's so much richness to it. It's like stained glass or something.
I got you. Well, it's interesting you say that, because I think that one of the things that stands out to me about this record in particular is that it's sort of folky and it's sort of heavy metal in a traditional sense, but it's sort of like deliberately not epic in a way. Like, all of this is sort of peasant music in a cool way. Obviously there's moments of grandeur and there's moments of an expansive scope, but it doesn't feel like it's attempting to be epic, attempting to be vast in the way that something like Vehemence is.
Yeah, we talked on the last show in Odal about how there are different senses of the word. So maybe I'm using it in the vulgar sense of people use epic to mean those sorts of noble sounding
a type of melody.
Simple, resolute, noble sounding scales with sort of strong resolutions and the Iron Maiden scale, right? Sounds fucking epic. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, it does.
and so a lot of this, even though this is often built on more like the various folk and medieval antecedents for that, he's consistently accessing that sort of gut-punching, bang-your-head effect that you would get from, like, power metal or whatever guilty pleasure folk metal band you want to name.
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect way to lead me into my next sample, where you're going to get some of all those things. Yeah. So we're going off the following track. All of our samples are taken off a block of 4 tracks in the middle of the record. So I assume that's kind of what we're agreeing. The heart of this lies in the middle. This is a song called L'Interdro de Languidi.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, fair French pronunciation, maybe. And here we're going to hear kind of a rapid exchange of ideas, and it's 3 ideas. There's a sort of burly heavy metal riff, very sort of Manowar style. There's a big, what you refer to, and I now say all the time, is the peasant hop folk metal part. And yes. Then there's an interpretation of the peasant hop part with a blast beat that makes it more black metal. And it seems to me as though it's almost sort of a meta song, where it's like, it's the band trying to explain to the listener how all of these ideas are linked by, swapping between them rapidly. So this is, this is about a 2-minute sample. You're just going to hear 3 parts, but you're going to hear all sorts of different juxtapositions about, the ways they interrelate. So let's check it out.
Wait,
I
also,
want to know what you think.
Can I say one thing before? It's
God.
This is as far as guesting, this is so it's not Skyclad, it's Skyforger, but they have a
Skyforger.
Yeah, they've got a bagpipes, flute, and percussion guest spot from a guy named Geoffroy Delaria, who's also in like Skyforger, Les Bâtards du Nord. These kind of more like actual folk metal bands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Skyforger is awesome. You should check him out. So, all right. So, L'Antadro de Languedic.
Yeah. I love that one.
Yeah, so. Oh, yeah. I mean, I love all of those. I love just the simple Man of War version of the original riff. That dun 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 dun. You know, that's
you had to point. Once you pointed it out to me, I heard it immediately. Right.
Oh, that's an immortal heavy metal riff. You know, that riff has been done hundreds, if not thousands, of times, and it's fine. That belongs to all of us. You know. But, I think, so obviously that's part of an extended passage. You know, we're about a minute in when we start it, so we missed, like, one sequence of the heavy metal riff into the folk hop, into the blast beat, but then it kind of repeats at the beginning of the section that I provided. So, it feels to me like there's something almost explanatory about it. You know, it keeps darting between these different parts. It is describing, in a sense, the interrelation of these things, which is, you know, something we've talked about, which is, you know, black metal is heavy metal, is folk music, is all these other things. And I think that these guys, in this band in particular, are maybe more consciously aware of that connection than a lot of guys are, who, don't let that lead you to believe I'm saying that, oh, if you don't know it, that means the music's not as good. No, that doesn't matter. But I think these guys are a little bit more consciously aware of the relationship between all these parts as they make this music, you know?
I hear what you mean. And they're also good at playing all of them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, there's never any clunky transitions. This is very elegant, very professional music.
But yes, you could to people who are sticklers about particular styles, you could isolate one of these riffs and they'd like it, and they wouldn't like the other ones.
You think so?
You know what I mean? Yeah. No, I mean, I'm trying to I'm trying to help reinforce your point. The idea being that the blast beat articulation of the folk riff, there will be people who see themselves as sort of into cult, or raw or pagan or melodic black metal even, right? Who will really like the blast part. But if you just played them like the heavy metal sounding part or the peasant hop part, they might not be so into it, right?
Even though they're all the same melody.
It's the same, yeah. But this is we're getting back to superficial scene shit, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. It's very interesting because I don't think I've heard, outside of maybe Paniquita, I don't think I've heard any band combine those things as sort of organically and elegantly as I hear on this record.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely the underlying melodic forms that are stitching the styles together.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I thought about this, which relates to your impression, I think I like your idea that this is this kind of narrative about the music. It's also, in a certain way, this is a very musician-y song. It's like a there's a musician-y quality to certain folk music, right? You have Celtic music. There are these trope patterns, right, that are called reels, and then people sort of riff on them and sort of trade ideas around, and you work an idea through whatever sequence.
It's the same as jazz standards.
Yeah, maybe a little more locked in than jazz, but yeah, different. Mm-hmm. Like a jazz standard, but you're sort of. But like a reel is really, it's like a fairly definite phrase.
Okay.
Like a longer, it's not just like a single little riff, but it's a fairly definite phrase that you can develop in various ways. And you might be trading the lead from instrument to instrument to instrument. Mm-hmm. And this is kind of like trading the lead between different instruments, except you're kind of shifting stylistic registers.
Yeah, I can see that.
And they're just kind of, and you know what else? It's that kind of peasant hop tempo that dominates the song, as you're saying. They're kind of just, they take this couple, basically one or two melodic stems, and they're just working them out. That's what I mean. It's it's jammy. This song just wants to jam on this sick riff, and each time it comes in, they're going to try to make it as sick as possible, and the vocalist will attack in a certain way. But it's got this very kind of walking pace. Takes its time. Does that make sense?
No, I get that. Yeah, this is definitely chilled out, exploratory music.
Yeah, it's really not trying to. Yes, it's not really trying to get it. It's not trying to sell you anything. It's just on a pilgrimage to go see a saint's elbow.
I like that. Yeah, gotta go down to the reliquary, visit the elbow.
Exactly. Yeah. I hear if you rub the elbow, it gives you rock hard erections for the next 40 years.
Oh, that's an elbow I need to visit then. Shit. All right, what do you got next?
It's I got Vehemence creve. This is in terms of what is or isn't epic, well, some people use the term to refer to really long songs. I think it's fair to call this one the epic also, because it hits a certain yes, I very much agree with you. As you described it before the show, the album is kind of peasants kind of grumbling about knights, but also kind of looking up to them. Which I thought was just a really lovely way of putting it. And
well, I like the way you described it as man-at-arms black metal. When you're playing Age of Empires 2 and they do an early raid and you gotta send your peasants in to become militia and they're like, fuck man, I don't know how to fight. I'm gonna do my best though.
Exactly. That so captures, a lot of these lyrics are based on regional folk tales, and that so captures the spirit of folk tales.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. But this song has maybe a little bit more of a knightly vibe, and it's very long. So I think this is maybe the epic proper. There are so many parts of this song, you could sample a bunch of them, but like, you know what I like to do. We get our distinctive folk samples up front, but if it's a black metal record, I'm gonna sample the part where it's like, are there some sick fucking black metal riffs on there? And here we go.
Dans le fleuve de ma mémoire, un certain nombre de mes souvenirs dans ces eaux noires.
How about that woobly woobly at the end?
Yeah, I was interested in your thoughts on that, because that is a very modern, almost like proggy power metal move there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a move that, like, if the band weren't as good, maybe I wouldn't like. But, like, I mean, I'd say they sell it.
Oh, yeah, no, I like it. I was just curious about your thoughts on it.
Oh, just, like, general thoughts. Yeah, so my thought is, like, well, it's, like, I guess my first, it's a weird synth to use in this context, especially just coming off the, off a truly storming passage like that, right? But
yeah, it's a very sci-fi kind of patch to use.
It sounds like our ear tracks it as sci-fi, or as maybe sort of like, I don't know, like dated 90s metal. But I think that here it's, first of all, like the intervals are great. It's got really cool arpeggios, but also like the way I'm hearing it is like it's, well, let's take the principle you established from Hanternoz, right? It's like showing sort of passing melodies between styles and between instruments.
Yeah. Here,
it's on the synth. And here the synth is like just another archaic folk instrument. It's like, one thing I want to draw attention to on this record, Sparda, the other dude, plays hurdy-gurdy, which is an awesome instrument, which is like, crank bagpipe, naturally distorted medieval drone music. It's sick. And here they're kind of, and you turn it and you play it and key it. And here the synth has this kind of turning, revolving sound in each of those woobles.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit, it doesn't sound like a hurdy-gurdy, but it's a little bit, it's got this kind of, if you de-link it from the sci-fi, it's got this kind of like organic burbling quality, and you can hear it as just, oh, somebody could crank this on a hurdy-gurdy, somebody could saw it on a violin.
Well, it could also be, the thing that I would link it to would be something like Vindir's Journey to the End, where there's that weird, almost like Euro EDM passage, but it still kind of works with the folk metal from before it. You know, it's not, they're not reading those sounds in the same way that we are.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And after all, you know, Varg listened to techno, and who's that? Helgeruna, right? They did that massive cover of Journey to the End where they take the techno part and make it the main part of the song.
Yeah, and they turn into like a weird kind of dubstep part, you know,
kind of a banger. Yeah. Obviously, I loved the riffs before that. I mean, I think anyone who listens to the show knows that those fulfill my criteria for, sort of severe, noble but severe ripping black metal riffs. Those are close in style to the way he plays in Vehemence in terms of this lead-driven stuff. The counterpoint on the first one, if that's exactly what it is, but the two, you know, the parallel or not parallel, the independently moving melodic lines on that first riff are so sick. They're like moving. They're not exactly going in opposite directions, but they're going basically in opposite directions. Creates a really kind of grinding, grim quality to it. This is just, the whole attack there is way more brutal than Vehemence.
Oh yeah, definitely. This is designed around rougher edges than Vehemence is.
Yes. And just before the show, we were talking about Soren. That second riff has this kind of Soren pulse to it.
I gotcha.
It doesn't have the bizarre skronky quality, right? But yeah, no. So just he knows how to do just a really crushing black metal part, but then this bizarre synthesizer folk follow up is pretty fucking cool.
Definitely. All right, so let's get to my final sample. This is off the we've been going one after the other in this sequence of tracks in the middle. So I'm going now to Leroy René a fait Mander. So obviously it's a French black metal record. I have to include the one giant Seigneur Valand riff, but
I knew it.
Yeah, you called that I was going to pick this part before I did. Yeah. But then there's interesting stuff afterwards. So you've got a very, very, like, punky, like, again, first two albums of Iron Maiden thing that goes on after which. And then there's a sequence of a couple riffs interchanging over a very strange, cascading rhythmic figure. And it lasts about a minute or more, where they are working out melodies around this very asymmetrical kind of rhythmic figure, which is not the kind of thing that you typically hear in, say, folk music, but it is the kind of thing you hear in heavy metal. So this is what makes this unique and sort of wedded to metal as a style as a whole. And I just found it really interesting and compelling. So let's try it out.
Sans foi
So you were saying while that was playing that the sort of heavy metal riff there, or the chord backing behind it, is that's literally Bro Hymn by Pennywise, isn't it?
Very, very close. Yeah, the death metal guy always compares things that shouldn't be compared to Pennywise, and it irks me. It's like a running theme of the show. It does sound like Pennywise here. I give this one to you. Honestly, I think on this song, right, they take that melody and turn it into, here it has this, I like what you described, this sort of asymmetrical, kind of chunky rhythmic picking. Mm-hmm. It's really cool and very metal, but I'm pretty sure that for the latter part of this song, they just rock it out with, like, thrashing trem. In a more kind of like street black metal way. And there it just really does sound like Bro Hymn. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but it's pretty damn close. Whoa, 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 whoa.
Yeah. Pennywise accessing primordial European folk music, as does a lot of punk accidentally. But so I find that that interchange between those two riffs, which are variations on each other at the end, really interesting over this, like I said, very asymmetrical rhythmic figure. Just sort of like vamping with the vocals across it. It feels like originally they were just supposed to do that interchange once, but when they played it together, they were like, oh, that's fucking sick, let's do it again. And obviously, the opening Giant Seigneur Voland riff is priceless. So, nothing to say about that.
Yeah, I love that, like, when he's like, okay, you want your French black metal riff, here it is. There we go. Yeah. And it's like, it's really good.
This is a little one Gash, and you're listening to Terminus.
And we are back from doing our French peasant dances to welcome the May, with this much more nocturnal, forbidding Russian peasant folkloric music, courtesy of Aza Solncem Luna, and Beyond the Sun, the Moon, which is, and the record is called On a Broom to the Stars. Interestingly, on Google Translate, I initially tried to translate that from Slovenian for some reason. I think I initially thought, is this a Slovak band or something? Mm-hmm. And it translated as And Behind the Sun, the Moon, which is a pretty cool name. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah.
It's kind of the same vibe anyway, but if you think of Beyond in that way, it gets pretty cool. So, this is a... I don't know a lot about this band. It seems like it's had previous incarnations under different names that are not on Metal Archives or are difficult to find. But this incarnation is pretty recent. And it's out on Hexen Cave, which is this Slovak label that I have just great respect for. Hexen Cave, we covered, they put out the... Cult of Enzivi we reviewed last year. As far as stuff that's well known that's associated with them, they're the home label for Krolok and Malokarpatan. And Malokarpatan now puts out stuff on bigger labels too. But and if you're a certain kind of niche person, you probably also like Triumph Genus.
Or maybe Zhran, who I'm kind of familiar with.
Wait, how are you spelling that one?
Szron. Zhran.
Oh, was that on this label?
Yep.
Oh, shit. No, Zhran is awesome. Yeah, Death Camp Earth. I had no idea.
Oh, yeah, they just did a couple little releases on this one. They did like a...
Oh, I'm looking at the Bandcamp. You're looking at the Metal Archives, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Zhran, the Migla before there was Migla, basically. Or there's definitely got to be some relationship between those bands. But anyway, so point being, Hexen Cave, a label that you may not have heard of, but has had an outsized effect and is really strong quality control. And the label has this kind of a very, kind of a pagan vibe, but very nighttime pagan. Very sort of witchery, werewolves. There's a great band on there called Temnahor, not Temnazor, that has like just blue moonlight breaking through trees. It's really, there's Krolak has a lot of like gorgeous blue light on their records. So kind of eerie moonlit vibe. And Beyond the Sun, the Moon really fits in with that. So they're from Tula, which is just south of Moscow. And as far as things it sounds like, yeah, well, it's distinctly Eastern European, but it's really sort of dark, kind of evil, dark, very nighttime symphonic black metal. As far as anything, so it's not really like, Nocturnal Mortem or something. It's more like the newer stuff by Arcona, which I occasionally talk about. And as far as classic reference points, certainly early Cradle of Filth, Dusk in Her Embrace, which is a big death metal guy favorite. Hecate Enthroned, Emperor pre-Night Side, so like, the Emperor EP, Hordane's Land, stuff like that. When they started to get the keyboards, but before it was Prague inflected. You had a couple other name drops for this.
Yeah, well, in terms of kind of, because obviously, well, I was surprised you skipped over referring to this as Gothic, which it very much is.
General atmosphere Gothic, yes.
Generally Gothic. And, so I just happen to know a couple name check groups in this style. I would say, for instance, an example would be old Theatres des Vampires, from France, who were sort of an early Cradle of Filth clone. And then I think, don't quote me on this, but I think they branched into more like Gothic EDM stuff later on, after their time as a metal band, but I would have to double check. And from Russia itself would be Black Countess, who was, it's a project that is like, kind of a joke to some people just because of the sort of like lyrics and the thematics of it, which are extremely pornographic. This guy just loves like gothic lesbian vampires and stories about them. Which, I mean, at the same time, it's like, I mean, I listen to Brutal Death all day. Is that sillier than anything I listen to? I don't know. But Black Countess, the old records actually are very good, sort of extreme gothic metal in the traditional Cradle vibe. Beyond that, yeah, there's, like, obviously, the thing everyone's going to hear immediately is Cradle of Filth and Hecate Enthroned, but I think that what makes this so distinct is that, it's, just how much Slavic black metal is in here. The core of this really is almost like primordial Slav black. We're talking about like late 90s or very, very early 2000s, sort of augmented with that gothic Cradle of Filth feel. And it results in a record that is, you're familiar with all the constituent parts, but it comes out very different, I would say.
You're gonna have to show me some of the Slavic sounding riffs, because I think they probably sound like bands that I don't know, would be my guess.
Yeah, don't worry, I've got something at the end for you. So
yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. So because this is gonna sound very different from your Gravelands or Druids or Astrophase or even your Crotas, right? So okay, yeah. For me, just this, and also, yeah, I think, but the thing that it does have that a lot of these Slav bands does is it does sound a little bit folky, but not at all in the, is it black metal, is it folk metal quality of the Hanternoz. Like, more just, like, in the sense that all Norwegian second wave sounded kind of folky, or like something like Emperor already sounds a little folky, because there's this shades of regional character, there's Norwegian classical music and stuff, right? And I would take the Emperor and just put it one click higher on the folkometer, and you get that. Right?
The folkometer.
So here, yeah, and so one thing that early Emperor is really good at is fucking ripping 1-2 kind of punk or thrash beats with double bass, and this band is very good at sounding very fast. Here is an impressive song called Shadow Ritual of the She-Wolf, from the beginning to about 2.5 minutes in. this is clearly the sign of a new subgenre called doggocore.
Well, they love their big blocks of kind of like wolf samples or like witches cackling and stuff. It's very charming because I don't know if I've mentioned on the show that I've got a really big soft spot for sort of like witchy black metal. You know, not like
kind of know you do, yeah.
Yeah, not like modern occult, but just very kind of like witchcraft, you know, Salem, 1800s type stuff.
I feel like there's a bit more of that stuff out now. Some of it is bad. Some of it's like old, disposable shit like Old Nick. But I think it's I think it's
Old Nick is fun. Old Nick is fun.
Whatever. I think it certainly sounds unique. But I feel like a lot of the there's various kinds of witch aesthetic coming back, which I think is good. Yeah, it's it has that folkloric quality to it. It's a little more. It's fun without being jokey. It can allow me to be, right? And so this definitely has that. The cool thing about the nature samples, they use them. First of all, that was like the first ever puppy sample I've heard on a black metal song. Like that sounded like a wolf pup.
Yeah. He's learning how to howl.
Yes, it's wonderful. So, but the cool thing is the samples are pretty important to the song structurally. They're not thrown in randomly. What they allow is this kind of I think these songs are basically through composed. Like a section might have a few repetitions within a quick section, but they'll never go back to the beginning of the song at the end or repeat the first part of the song. They'll never do like A, B, C, A, B, C. And so what you heard is we just had this sort of ripping stuff with a continually developing keyboard melody over it. That almost reminded me a little bit of that Stargeist riff you were playing with the Mexican band, in that it just kept spiraling up.
Yeah.
This sort of free flow. There were like two key parts, and then this like glorious free floating one. And then, we get our wolf sample, and then the wolf sample keeps going, so that when they come strutting back in, that was kind of like a kvist strut. When it comes back in, you get the wolves howling kind of in key, and they keep the sample.
Yeah, I always like it when a band incorporates the sample into the music rather than just using it as an interrupter.
I think it's very important. And here what the interrupter quality does is it allows them to accomplish a sort of... There's nothing really discontinuous about the part of the song that comes after, but it allows them to make a turn in the song.
Yeah.
Pretty rapid. And some of these songs will have two sample breaks and these turns in them, but it never sounds like they're cheating. It's never like, oh, we don't know how these parts go together. Okay, let's throw a sample in there.
Yeah, no, I've always disliked people saying it's like, oh, we're just gonna... Like, I saw some guys over at Hessian Firm talking about it. It's like, people bitching about the idea of the stop and the solo guitar bringing a new riff in. It's just a cool technique. I mean, we don't need to fight about that technique. It's just great,
Yeah, sometimes you can do that. Right? I mean, also, you love samples. You're the Mortician guy.
Absolutely. People don't realize that, Mortician, you have to listen to it with the samples in. You're losing part of the music when you take them out,
That's what I say. Don't skip the pupper part.
True puppercore black metal.
Yes.
Right.
So, what do you got?
Well, what have you got? Because I've got stuff from the back half. Excuse me. I thought that everything was off the back half of the record, but oh no, it is. Yeah, you've got the next sample actually.
Yeah. I feel So we kind of just I pulled my samples before you. So all right, so this is there's some really good riffs on this record. That keyboard stuff was pretty impressive on this, but I should point out, on the back end of the Moon Hunter, if you're one of those people who wants to hear just Shadow Ritual of the She-Wolf actually has some incredible riffing on the back end, just guitar riffing. Also, back end of the Moon Hunter, awesome. guitar keyboard interlock, super cool build. These band really like sort of grandiose ascending melodies that just build and build. But yeah. I guess I'm actually moving backwards. Or no, I am moving forward.
Ignore the Cyrillic. Just look at the Romanized titles.
Sorry, okay. Yeah, no, I'm on A Broom to the Stars now, which is a little later in the track list. So this is the title track. I wouldn't say it's like I don't think it's really meant to be the centerpiece track on the record, interestingly. But it doesn't really have the big riffs. But this is just, the beginning is so cool. It's one of my favorite parts. And anytime I listen to this record again, I'll like be waiting for it. So let's go.
All right.
Hear the band trip?
Well, it's are you talking about when they go into the bass only part?
Just now, yeah. Where you get this racing punk beat, as you said, it's very Cradle of Filth, right?
That's a very specific Cradle of Filth technique where they will break out with a sort of like extended fill into a passage where the guitars drop out and it's just bass and synths. That is perhaps the most direct idea taken from Cradle. I mean, there's like mood ideas,
and the bass there's kind of bouncy, right? In a way that's very different from Emperor bass, which at that time was just power chords.
Yeah,
it's like that makes sense as Cradle because that's like GBH or discharge bass or Venom.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and it's also, when you're talking about, like, the through-composed idea, the way that Cradle makes songs is they loop, but in a very elongated fashion. A lot of the time, the first riff is the final riff, but in an augmented form. Sort of like the opening riff on a Cradle of Filth song is like the flashback prologue at the beginning of the movie, and they spend their whole time getting back there. Here it's more straight through composed, but you can hear the idea sort of operating in the way they structure songs.
Yeah, so stylistically, very Cradle of Filth, that makes sense to me. But you hear that like sort of stagger. The punk beat rips off, and then and you've got this. It's already highly rhythmic, right? The bass is kind of playing against the drums. Just fantastic musicianship throughout, and one sign of that is just they do this coordinated stumble. It goes sort of like dum 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 bum dum dum. There's this hitch in the melody. The drum part breaks. It sounds like the band falls down, and then they just get up and keep rolling. And it really sounds like so much of this record is you're either running through the woods at night or flying through the woods at night or being chased through the woods at night. And this is definitely a being chased through the woods at night part where you like trip over a root.
Yeah, I was about to say tripping over a root. Very Evil Dead,
Yes. Keep on trucking. But the beginning of this, the beginning also just so good at playing fast. Constantly throughout this, the drummer is dropping in flam stuff and just cool double bass fills. And it just rips into that slowdown. Vom, dum, vom, dum, vom, dum, bum. So you go into the slowdown, like, not only do you, like, half time it or something, you kind of change time signature into the breakdown.
You've got that, like, extended fill passage that's, like, 3/4 or something, and then lurching you back into 4/4 outside of it.
It's so heavy. I mean, really good musicianship, and you can hear them just sort of stretching. The bass just stretches the time into the new signature at the beginning. Really heavy. It reminded me of the breakdowns on Pre-Nightside Emperor, which, honestly, I feel like I might want to... I keep talking about that so much, and I bet a lot of our listeners haven't heard it. I kind of feel like I want to sample it, but you also had a maybe more apropos reference for that.
Possibly. I mean, obviously Emperor is going to be a big deal for anyone doing kind of symphonic black metal stuff. But even talking about symphonic black metal is kind of a weird thing, because that is a style that's mostly been abandoned by Western Europe and America. But symphonic black metal really continued in a big way in South America. That's still like a really big style down there, as well as in, Russia, Ukraine, and certain parts of Eastern Europe, which I find really interesting. This sort of abandoned style in a way that kept going for a lot of people outside of the immediate metal sphere. So let me go to one of my samples. I think, actually, the back half of this record is the stronger one. I just think that everything gets put together a little bit more on the back half. I think that the songs are a little bit more organically structured on the back end. One thing I would point out is we're mostly sampling beginnings of tracks. I would say that maybe one of the issues for this band is how to end songs. You've got a lot... Really?
Back ends are really strong. I just tended to sample the beginnings. I was almost hoping you'd get some back ends.
Oh, well, I would say personally, I feel like a lot of the times they're kind of, resorting to the fade out. In some cases, I feel like they've got wonderful ideas of how riffs interact, but at least for me, coming up with a solid ending, a really impactful, punchy ending is something these guys
then you're just being like the metal arc. Then you're just being like the Hessian Firm guys. Some bands can do fade outs. Why not? Like, as long as the riff's on the end of the song.
I was going to specifically say
like this band does.
I was going to specifically say that I'm not one of those guys that just hates the fade out as a technique as a whole, but in this case, I feel like they could, work up the ends of tracks a little bit more.
All right.
Just like that quiet, all right, just kind of in the background. It's like there's an anger there that I appreciate. All right, so all right,
just a disappointment.
Thanks, Dad. Appreciate it. All right, so let's go to Wreath of Sorrow. This is probably one of my favorite parts of the record. So this is a track that begins with a sort of elongated instrumental intro. And I really love the way that it develops throughout it. It feels much more organic than a lot of the tracks. I think this is them firing on all cylinders, but I decided let's sample a little bit of the back end of the intro, the middle nature sample, as is tradition, and then into the meat of the song. There is
into
just
the meat of the song.
Exactly. So, you're going to hear a lot of folky kind of intervals on the main riff after the sample drops. And just, I don't know, there's something about this track which strikes me apart from the others that I think is like, oh, this is the track to pattern off. as this band continues. So let's give it a shot. Makes that to me after the sample is that ripping sort of, I mean, I guess it's almost like a stenchcore drum beat, that sort of extended thrash beat, that dun 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 dun, you know, little trill on the kick drums adds a little more activity in the rhythm section, and just I like it a lot. Well, it's not a true D beat, because, you know, a D beat, as far as I understand, is like dun 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 dun. And then clustering.
A D beat is doop tap doop tap. And so
this
is like so this is what you're thinking of is the bands that cheat on D beats. Doop doop tap ba da boop da ba da boop da. That's a cheating D beat. This is like a metal drummer who's really crisp and precise and is using double bass. Sometimes a classic D beat will be bass drum, single kick bass. So this is a metal drummer who's using double bass to fill in very precise, extremely fast D beats.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I've heard that specific beat used once, again, like constantly on early Cradle stuff. Oh, and to add a little bit of color to talking about Cradle, you mentioned Dusk in Her Embrace. I think it's actually a little earlier. I think these guys are really into V Empire or Vampire, depending on who you talk to, Dark Fairy Tales and Palestine. That was the EP. It's sort of like a full-length EP between Principles of Evil Made Flesh and Dusk in Her Embrace. I think that's something they're really centered on here, because I was just listening to that the other day, actually. Because it's not quite dedicated to just those like high-flying pop black metal riffs that came to define Cradle of Filth. You know, it's hinting at that, but it's also just more aggressive, darker, and a little bit more traditionally black metal in a lot of ways. You would love that so much.
Yeah,
you would fucking fall in love.
See, when I was a kid and saw this cover, I was like, oh god, so corny, and I'm like, haha, fucking sick.
Yeah, V Empire, and actually the album after Dusk in Her Embrace, Cruelty and the Beast, you would probably like both of those more than Dusk, I think.
Interesting. Well,
yeah.
Definitely some high-quality goth chick covers, and also, like, I do like Dusk in Her Embrace, for sure, but, you know, I just jumped to it because that's the one that I hear you mention, and you're the real Cradle expert, so this is good to know.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites, no doubt, but I would say for your taste, if you want the Cradle style but more black metal, I would say that either of those two on either side of Dusk would be probably more to your taste.
Dude, song. Either side of Dusk. Possibly by Cradle of Filth.
That could be a Cradle of Filth song, definitely. But, all right. So, anyway, I like that passage a lot. That's just one of my favorites in terms of just sort of like the way the riffs are oriented and very, very natural feeling. Not to say that the rest of this record is inorganic, but I think that was a very good example of the band at their best, as far as I read them. But now we're going to get to...
That moment, I think that sample has a big hook at a moment where the album needs it. I like that this band withholds sort of more conventionally. You know, you said in the notes, folky, epic, more just sort of like simple sort of tension releasing Dorian scale stuff. I like that this band, it all kind of moves around that, and there are certain riffs like that, but they sort of withhold, they often withhold like I Am the Black Wizards moments. And
this is not a band that thrives of it. They're not interested in a single big riff as the hook of the song, which is respectable. I like that.
For sure. And so there is no, like, there are not the sort of usually, like, sweet moments or concerted... I think there's a big hook on the end of The Moon Hunter, which I strongly encourage people to check out. But, like, it's more of a blasting moment. But just in terms of, like, a more fun or poppy or just sort of... Yeah, something like that. I think this track, this sample you had, like, provides a good moment of that, the album. Because I was thinking, like, it's pretty cool that they haven't done something like that yet. But also, it might be nice to hear one. And it hit right then.
Yeah, no, I thought that landed really well. That's one of the few traditionally big moments on this record. And again, I'm a guy that constantly talks about big moments, samples them, but... We've got plenty of bands that revolve around that. It's cool to see an underground band choose the longer, more difficult road to songwriting. So I'm going to get to my last sample. This is off Forest of Witches Summons, where I want to get a little bit more into the Slavic thing. Because... I think that the core of this music is Slavic black metal. It's just a type of Slavic black metal that we haven't really talked about a whole lot. Because I would actually, in the way you hard disagreed with me on the endings of songs here, I would hard disagree on the lack of Nocturnal Mortem influence. Because I think Nocturnal Mortem is important to this band. Specifically goat horns and the earlier demos, up to, maybe, and including To the Gates of Blasphemous Fire, before they got really bizarre and focused on folk ideas. But there's
you got me, bro. I don't know anything about Nocturnal Mortem. I have a vague idea of how they sounded, and I probably associate them more with their, very kind of Thor's hammery phase.
Oh, no, yeah, you should listen to Goat Horns, man. You'd probably really love that record.
I think I keep trying it and not liking it, but I'll try it again soon.
Yeah, it's definitely like an acquired taste in a way. It's a weird case where they're more underground, but it's better if you go directly from, like... Cradle of Filth to Nocturnal Mortem, it's like that's an easier path. But if you listen to like Goat Horns or like Lunar Poetry, that would be up your alley. Anything after that, that's questionable, but take it as it comes.
Right.
But I want to sample Forest of Witches Summons because I think this is one of the moments where it's the most Slavic in this style of Nocturnal Mortem, or maybe for something a little more deep cut like Kataksu. So we'll check that out, and then we'll get to something that I also think is a huge influence here, which we've actually sampled on the show before, but I can never get enough of them. But first, let's listen to Forest of Witches Summons.
All right. Yeah, that's definitely a cool part. And I definitely hear how those melodies sound a lot more Slavic.
And it's also hilariously witchy. I love the witch
Yes.
cackling. And that's just such a fucking cool thing. You know, I wish more black metal bands had just, you know, cool fucking witch cackles in the middle of stuff. But, but one thing I want to bring up is, alright, so this is very similar to me to, obviously, one of my favorite Eastern European black metal bands of all time that I brought up on the show a couple times, which is Dub Buck.
Yeah.
So Dub Buck is sort of like second string in terms of popularity in weird Eastern European black metal circles, but they went through a lot of different kind of phases over the course of their career, and their very early stuff is what I want to sample here. This is going to be off their Misiak Pomsty compilation, which is like their first two demos. It's basically considered a full length by a lot of people, and I want to check out a track called In Search of the Soul, and I want you to think about this last sample and maybe the rest of the material on this album, and think about the way the keys interact with the guitars on this, and even the keyboard tones themselves. And, tell me if this makes sense to you as a possibly a big feature of this band. So I've played a little bit of Dub Buck on the show before, but mostly some of their like mid-era or later era, like more kind of thrashy stuff. What do you think about this in contrast to this record?
I like this pretty well. It's interesting. You can certainly hear the meshing of more folk things. Dub Buck, that kind of never settles into one idea, which in some ways is strong, but I feel like it also is a little bit diffuse, the Dub Buck.
Yeah, I get that.
It keeps... Yeah, however, I think that relates to a thing that this band maybe does better than Dub Buck at this stage, which is the best symphonic black metal is really good at navigating between different harmonic colors, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like in the particular sample you had, this band does that a lot. Not only does it throw us out of kind of eerie gothic symphonic black metal minor key into more broad sounding pagan harmonies, but it kind of changes, it shifting around chords and maybe keys pretty rapidly. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh no, Dubbuck was like technically hyper accomplished compared to a lot of their contemporaries, which is not in and of itself, you know, a reason to listen to them, but they used it in a really compelling way, I feel.
Yeah, well, I feel like so I mean, I think there's definitely a similar idea in the Beyond the Moon the Sun sample there. I think Beyond the Moon the Sun pulls it off better. But it's also, they've had, you know, a long time for those ideas to germinate, right, relative to Dubbuck doing it. Mm-hmm. I get the idea. It's you're taking, you know what the similar idea is? It's that relatively simple kind of broad, harmonically simple pagan folky melodies are being moved around a lot to create complexity and different harmonic shadings. Does that make sense? And a kind of like almost shifts in roots that sort of are unexpected and make it feel more chromatic and things like that. And so I think Dubbuck is doing that, and that's for sure the technique being used here.
Yeah. No, I think I bet these guys have a much more deep-cut understanding of Slavic black metal than might appear at first listen on this, because what everyone's going to hear at the beginning of this is, oh, you know, Cradle of Filth, where we're reaching back to Hecate enthroned, etc. But there's a lot more going on. What makes this so exciting is, I mean, shit, we could listen to a lot of local style black metal bands in the US that are kind of copying Cradle, but these guys are doing it with more panache, you know, more understanding of the purpose of those melodies. And I think ultimately that's what sets them apart and what makes them so exciting to listen to now.
Satan is ever ready to seduce us with sensual delights.
serve below is master of all. He will grant you anything, but you must serve him faithfully. But in return for this help, you must promise to worship and adore him. I will do anything that's necessary. Great Lord of Darkness will welcome you.
So after some weirdo forgotten Chicago black metal in Valhalla, let's get to following up on our thread, I guess in a way that we started with a searcher line, which is what makes good or bad post black metal. So this is a record by Genune. I'm not sure. This is a Romanian band. It's a Romanian word, so I'm not sure about the pronunciation. But the record is called Inert and Unerring. This just came out like a week and a half ago. And I decided to bring this on, well, one, because I was in a pinch because everything else got pushed back, and also, I thought this was a good thread to follow. I mean, we've talked about post-black, usually negatively, on the show, but I think it's important that we keep abreast of the scene, to some degree, and figure out, well, I mean, there's good post-black and there's bad post-black, so what's the difference between the two? How do we ascertain exactly what makes this style tick? And I thought that these guys did a few things a little bit differently from a lot of the post-black bands, mostly structurally, that I thought was important. We're researching post-black theory right now. So Genune are a band who seem focused on the idea of using black metal technique to enhance a base of what I called, upper class rock music, kind of art rock, kind of, say something like the Pixies or Smashing Pumpkins, not art rock, but clearly, this higher brow style of rock music. And I personally think that may be the way forward for the style, which is to kind of divorce post-black from black metal itself. There's some very good black metal riffs and moments on this record, but clearly the focus is... Really?
Yeah.
I think I sample, some
I think
pretty solid.
There's one, but it's arguably black metal.
Fair enough. Well, I mean, there you go. So, what are your feelings about this? Apart from I know you don't like it. But.
Yeah, I try to be. We always find the positive in the stuff we cover. I mean, I just really don't like this. There are certainly things that are worth talking about here, but it is. And it certainly is very much shifted towards rock music. I think this band should just stop. They should stop the screaming and the riffs and focus more on the really rockish stuff at the end and just play kind of emotional rock music. I mean, like, it's just do the catatonia thing, right?
Oh, that's fair. I mean, I don't feel like that necessarily disagrees with what I said, which is I think this is a band which is strongest when they're aligning themselves with sort of arty rock music. I feel like maybe a lot of guys, because like a few of the members of this band are also in a funeral doom band. So I think that what happens is a lot of metal musicians want to do artier, softer music, but they feel like, maybe they're sacrificing something or not doing something to the fullest extent by not including that sort of extreme music angle.
Oh, just because they like metal, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, they like metal, and that's kind of their starting point that they revolve around. But I would say in a case like this is a band that probably should just be a really cool, weird post-rock band.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really like the post-rock parts on this either, but yeah, it's I suppose we should just get into the samples. So
yeah, that's fair. So you got something off. So there's like 3 main tracks on this album and a little instrumental interlude, but you've got something off the first one. So
yeah, so this is Unworthy Sons and Daughters. It's kind of a long sample because a number of things happen here. The beginning, I would say this starts off all right, and it connects to the sertraline in the sense that this band has a good feel for the kind of guitar-bass interaction and the kind of rhythmic subtlety that you would get with Slowdive. It's kind of independent. The guitar and bass is kind of independent levels. Bass is doing a lot. Multiple guitar things kind of meshing. As you'll hear, I don't think they really have the harmonic ear that Slowdive or Sertraline do. And a lot of the harmonic bass from this is coming from Scottish music, I think.
Okay.
We will get into that. But let's go to 2.5 minutes in. These are full album timestamps, aren't they? So never mind, forget that. But just Unworthy Sons and Daughters, we're going to listen for a bit under 3 minutes.
All right, so guide us through what you want to draw attention to.
Okay, well, in terms of like what, yeah. So how that develops, what I guess you could start from the back, which is just what we've got as a big anticlimax there. Finally, we get to the intense black metal part, and it's the weakest of the riffs. Relies on this sort of like kind of half-formed stock idea that just sinks. And you know that, so that's one of that's maybe the weakest part of that sample. But we'll fast forward it to the beginning. You could hear that like they were really good at the rocky interplay of these different parts, right? There was the sort of the melodic and harmonic quality in that shoegazy part was kind of blank, but like the general meshing of the sounds was nice, and they could do more with that. Then they do a big dramatic moment, which I think they do pretty well. You get the like big minor 6 descent, you know, dum, dum, and I'm like, okay, I'm ready. You know, it's a pretty cool flip out of that part. And that one move is just very like Mogwai, young team, sort of genesis of like the modern post-rock sound. Mm-hmm. So that's what I mean by Scottish, Mogwai, Scottish band. That sort of, the sort of open tonality in these sort of like glistening guitars, big sort of sanded down minor scales, things like that. Very, very classic post-rock. And they're sort of, you know, going for that sweeping cinematic vibe, right? And so they do that there, and it's kind of cool. And then they start triplet blasting. And that is a very Slavic black metal gesture, but the chords, again, are super, like very much derived from that strain of post-rock. And, you know, they're really, the chords are really telling you the kind of mood you're supposed to have. They're, like, hitting you over the head with a certain kind of profundity, or signals for profundity, which I don't love about this kind of music. However, the sheer intensity of it sells it, I think. And it's like, okay, it wants me to have this big, passionate teenage emotion, and I can, okay, I'll do it. And next riff backs off the intensity a bit, but it's got good, they've got good trem. And it's still got this kind of vaguely Celtic, Scottish-y feel. You could hear it also as a Winterfilleth riff. There's a band from the UK, there's a kind of pan-British band called Crom Dubh who has some riffs like that. But in Crom Dubh, I buy them because they also have some really, really brutal riffs. This is, so, I don't know. And then finally we get into what's supposed to be the big black metal moment, and it's like, the stuff before, I think, had a little more to it. But that's kind of a tour of basically every different style they engage on here. I don't know. What did you make of it?
I mean, well, more a question of what do I make of any part in particular. I mean, I think that, I've got a more positive feeling about the final riff than you do, just because that's a kind of riff that I enjoy more than you do. It's just like, the disappointment, I can hear it filtering through my headphones, but no, that's a kind of riff that I like. I think the take on Mogwai is important, because I think kind of at this band's best, they're accessing that band more than... Oh, go ahead.
No, I think that's probably true, and I think they're probably closer to the source on Mogwai than a lot of post-black bands are.
I think a lot of post-black bands are closer to Explosions in the Sky.
Exactly. Yeah, whereas it does... I think that's fair to say. Would you say that this band at their strongest kind of sound... At least at their strongest metal-y parts sound more like Mogwai?
I would say so. Because, like, a lot of post-black bands sound like Explosions in the Sky, which is a terrible thing for a metal band, even though I really like Explosions in the Sky, on their own. But I think their melodies and kind of gestures that they do that just do not gel with any sort of extreme music. I think this is...
Also, I really like Mogwai. I would say that that chorded part that I'm saying sounds like Mogwai, it's watered down but like it's kind of more adjacent to Explosions in the Sky instead of at third hand via that.
Yeah, no, I would say that. Yeah, no, I mean, I would agree that I think one of the problems for this band, which is kind of the same problem that a lot of black or post-black bands have, is that it is, like you said, like too adjacent to Explosions in the Sky, like big, pretty melodies. And obviously there's big, pretty melodies in black metal all over the place, but the way Explosions does it is extremely different, and it is bespoke to their style of music, and I don't think it works in a black metal context. But I will say, I feel like, as far as just like black metal riffing or that approximation of the technique, because I will say right now, this is not a black metal band in any way to me. This is a post-rock band that is using black metal technique. I honestly like them more than you do, but I think ultimately that's just a taste thing. I have more time for those kinds of riffs than you do. So I don't know how much I have to add, like, in that regard, at least.
Well, you've got a sample with another good high-intensity moment.
Yeah, so I've got one off the second track, To Drown Within Yourself, and I think this shows the methodology of the band at its best when it comes to sort of black metal riffing, which is, let's take sort of Slavic black metal intervals, and we're going to apply a shoegaze or emo technique on guitar to play them. Sort of like staggered right hand work, a little bit more attack than you would expect from these sorts of melodies. I think this is just a good example of the band at their best when it comes to more black metal stuff. So let's give that one a shot. Yeah, so I think that what they're doing there is playing with sort of traditional Eastern European black metal intervals, but, you like the opening riff, you've got that, you're holding on that main chord and then you're kind of feathering it out with the arpeggiated ideas on the back end. It's just a very sort of old emo technique. And I think that maybe that's the way you write a post-black riff, is you don't try to merge the two ideas completely. You take melody from one side and technique from the other. And I just think that comes across a lot stronger to me than a lot of other post-black bands.
Yeah, it's I had to try to figure out what you meant by sounding Slavic on that. I feel like you're talking to, like, I think what it does sound like is very recent Slavic black metal, like late Druid, which is already heavily cut with the sort of shoegaze and post-black influence.
Yeah, that's fair.
Here.
Yeah.
It's
I was definitely thinking of late Druid and some of the other, like, newer, more post-informed Slavic black metal bands there.
Yeah, for sure. Then it is totally a riff out of that vein. And in terms of, like, good riff, it's probably the best riff on the record. Or it is, if we want to, like, judge metal riff. Yeah, so that sounds definitely related to this newer wave of Slav black. Yeah, the picking on that, I like the drone string effect, sort of melancholy intervals shifting across that is nice. And I think you're right I like how you always distinguish people's right and left hand dynamics, because it's a good way of expressing stuff about rhythm. This band, I think, these guys are really good musicians. And not just in the sense of technically accomplished, but, like, the right hand work throughout is really good.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I would prefer a version of this record that, like, you could write a version of this record where you changed all the chords and notes, and it would be completely different and really, like, I would like it a lot more. Like, does that, like, you could keep almost all the rhythmic ideas. Does that make sense?
Oh, I get
like,
that. Definitely.
Like, his picking is really good. He's got, like, there's aggressive picking throughout this. Or, like, on that, on that kind of, like, cheery kind of Celtic-y riff on the last track.
Yeah,
it's really forceful picking on something.
It's sort of unusually, it's sort of like unusually gnarly right hand work for as delicate as the melodies are.
Yeah, and if you want to so if you go the route of trying to make post-black as kind of high-intensity music, like Sertraline does or whatever, then you need to have that. You need to have that, like, instrumental attack in order to sell it, right? And in order to make it hit. But then there's this alternate path that I think so there are moments where this band attains, like, good post-black as metal, right? And I think that's a good one, an example of that. But for a lot of the time, they're closer to post-black as rock. Like, the rest of that sample, I couldn't do with the rest of that sample. The back end of it, though, is interesting because it again shows that Winter Philith is now influencing things.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that Winter Philith has turned out to be a very important band.
Yeah. It's now the Slavs are listening to Winter Philith. So you've got now a more rocky part that I think we both agree might be I don't know. To me, this seems like it might be the objectively strongest part on the record, to me.
Yeah, well, we both sample pieces off of this track, the final one, Eastern European Discontent, which is probably the track where the heart of this music really lies. And you've got one a little earlier than me, so what have you got?
Okay, this is just me complaining more. But like the first sample, this has some moments that are cool, and those more could be done with them. So what you're going to hear here is you get a little bit of this more sort of late Druidkin. There's some solid bass on it, and then there's a really beautiful part, and we will get to that. You'll hear where they go with it, and then I'll discuss. Yeah, so did you catch that little clean part?
Yeah, I did. Well, it's funny that you started before that, because I think the riff before that the sample starts with is, to my ear, one of the worst on the record.
Oh yeah, that's a classic example of a holding. I mean, the riff after it is really bad too. I mean, they're classic. This kind of just like da 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 da. You kind of this rock chording. This is a thing that late Druid does, but because Senko's so good with harmony and the band is good, they can get away with it usually.
So, I was about to say sometimes.
I was going to say sometimes. No, there are I like the late Druid stuff, but there are moments that are outright bad, self-indulgent, and also have this kind of lachrymose, sinking feeling of just like, sort of inward turned, just very, very unmetal emotions, but also emotions that I think are kind of alien to a lot of the best of the rock references that are coming from this.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just, I mean, it doesn't, I mean, if you want to say anything more about those parts.
I mean, like, I don't hate the riff after the acoustic part, and I think the acoustic figure itself is pretty good. Obviously, but this whole section you chose is holding pattern right here.
Yeah,
no question.
If I wanted to be a real jerk, I'd say the acoustic part is like the heaviest part on the record. Like, in terms of packing in, and I kind of mean that seriously. Like, I always try to explain, something like Slowdive isn't good just because it's delicate and pretty. Slowdive is very powerful music, and it's all coming through in these relations between notes, basically. It's this very delicate power. Those are really well selected intervals. There's that lovely lift on it towards the end. And it's as sentimental as everything else on this record, but there's a genuine kind of melodic invention there, and there's more tension and development in it. It's darker. There's more of a complete minor scale idea there. And if you came out of that and just started tremming the shit out of that would be a black metal riff. You could just play the same riff. You could trem it single. You could lead it. You could play it as lead arpeggios. You could rhythm guitar chord it. You could do both. You could really, you wouldn't even have to come up with a new riff after that. That could just be a pre-drop thing, but instead it settles back into this sort of, this kind of just, listless sort of riff that the riff after is supposed to be a climax, and to me, again, it comes as oh, here we are again.
I gotcha. Well, let me go to my final sample, which is a little bit later on Eastern European Discontent. And I think this is a sample that probably encompasses what we think the band does best, which is being kind of a rock band. And I think that here is a really good execution of an interesting idea for post-black, which is, instead of directly drawing from the well of emo or shoegaze, what if they just went with sort of arty rock music as a base, for instance, like the Pixies or the Smashing Pumpkins? And I think there's a lot of that on this section here towards the end of the album. The bass is doing a lot of heavy lifting. It's providing a lot of harmonic color to a kind of a static riff pattern. And I would say that as far as post-black bands we've covered or talked about, this one is probably a little bit more directly connected with post-rock than a lot of these bands are. We talk about, post-black, you think post-rock, really it's usually emo or shoegaze. These guys are tied more directly to post-rock itself. So, let's give this
Also,
one a shot.
mostly they're tied to other post-black bands. You
Yeah,
know, there's
yeah,
this-
yeah. Of course, there's that too.
Yes. All right.
All right. So originally I thought that you would hate that passage, but apparently you actually like it.
Yeah, well, I like the Smashing Pumpkins. And,
Yeah.
you know, like, yeah, that's a moment. Well, so a lot of this record has moments of, to me, anticlimax, where they gesture towards something really big and go into a holding pattern riff. There you go. That's something really big. It's kind of daring musically. It makes a strength of the fact that they're good musicians who actually listen to the various source materials for this, especially Smashing Pumpkins. And yeah, I mean, I re-listened to Siamese Dream the other week. I still love it. I mean, that's...
Well, it's a great record.
And, you know, and what I like of it is there's a kind of honesty to it, right? They're no longer trying to be... Not that this band ever was pretending to be, like, true black metal, right? We wouldn't accuse them of that. Nobody would mistake it for it. However, they're, as you've said, they're, like, maybe more wedded to those metal norms than they need to be, and it can leave them neither here nor there in kind of just... post-black blast beats, whereas when they just let themselves be really good rock musicians here, that's just, you know, this is taking a, you know, this is sort of taking sentiment that and turning it into like the big gesture, right? And it's kind of there's a kind of it's not at all holding pattern. I think there's more genuine feeling in that riff than in most of the record.
Hi, this is Taylor from Crushing the Scepter, and you're listening to Terminus Podcast.
All right, we are back with a band who is kind of relevant to both of our pasts, in a way. We've got a Clandestine Blaze with the new record Secrets of Laceration, out on Northern Heritage, of course. So Clandestine Blaze is a band who... This is deep cut Terminus shit right here. This is a band that really got popular like as we were getting into black metal. Mid-2000s records like Fist of the Northern Destroyer were very big. Chapels of Atrocity, I think it was called, was another one. Miko Aspa, one of his many projects, his most decidedly traditional black metal project, became very popular. And I think at the time, both of us just didn't really get it. And I think that's one of the funny stories from you, right? Is like one of the first like cool guy black metal records you ever got was a Clandestine Blaze record, right?
Yeah, I've told another side of this story before, but it's a good story. It's like, the first time I went to a record store with the express purpose of buying black metal records, I went to Hospital Productions in New York. So, that was run by Dominic Furnow from the label, right, of that name. Back when they were just getting started. There was a physical store, and it was in a basement and shit. And I went in there, and I asked. The cool thing is, I once asked them to. I asked the guy to recommend me something that was like, I didn't quite have an ear for like the high end guitar sound of a lot of the modern sort of underground black metal, right? And so I was like, do you have something with like big meaty discharge riffs? And he called Dominic Furnow, who was at a show or at a festival, and Dominic told him to give me Malveillance. So I talked. We played that. We played that earlier on Terminus. It's some of the most aggressive music ever made. But the other thing that guy recommended to me, was Clandestine Blaze as just some like core, powerful underground black metal. And I remember on the subway back from there, I was looking through the CD, the CD notes, and I open up the Clandestine Blaze booklet, and I'm like, I'm in for it now.
But that was Fist of the Northern Destroyer, wasn't it?
No, it was. I just checked. It was Deliverers of Faith.
Oh, okay.
More Fist of the Northern Destroyer. That sounds like shit that lyrically I would have just been like, "This is sick." Deliverers of Faith definitely had some extremely pervy shit in there.
Oh yeah. Well, that's Miko for you. So our relationship with Clandestine Blaze. So I mean, really, when we talk about this, it's our relationship to Miko Aspa, and for me personally, Miko. I mean, obviously, Miko's done all kinds of different work over the years, but I feel like he is strongest doing like sort of doom metal or noise. His black metal stuff has never really struck a chord with me, but what do you think about Mika's output overall?
Well, yeah, when I got that record, that was at a time when I sort of overlooked, I mean, you're young and you're trying to develop taste, so you overlook a lot of things you shouldn't, but or you decide that you don't like this or that for dumb reasons. But I think I feel confident about how I felt about that, it was just, I guess it was my first taste of the Finnish guitar sound, which I think on Clandestine Blaze, like we were saying about early Sargeist, a lot of people just connected to the really melodic parts on Transylvanian Hunger. Mm-hmm. So that's probably how I would have heard it. But the sort of epic sounding, sort of chorded parts were just very spare for that style and just not great to my ears.
Yeah.
And, granted, I was looking for other things in it at that time, but I don't think they were great. And then there was some, like, slow, heavy stuff that I liked okay, but didn't fit that well. And it seemed all very Darkthrone influenced. And, I had it around for a while, and eventually when I was selling shit, I just sold it. I like his, eventually my buddy convinced me to appreciate DSO, and so, I like his vocals on C Monumentum and stuff. The strangely, the sort of vehemently grumbling vocals over this sort of glorious cathedral-esque guitar is pretty cool, right? But yeah, that's about all I know. I know you identify him strongly with power electronics. I would say that probably makes sense. Neither of us have really paid attention to Clandestine Blaze for a long time, but, like, this new one makes me think, Well, okay, maybe in some ways he's centered in the power electronic scene, but damn, he understands something about metal on this new record. Like, you know.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting listening to this and trying to personally analyze it to be like, was I missing something before? Or?
No, it's a different band. I think it's clearly the same band, but it's gotten so much better.
Okay, yeah, because you're probably more familiar. I remember listening back when I was a kid to, Fire Burns in Our Hearts and Fist of the Northern Destroyer and stuff like that, and it just, like, it struck me as, like, I really respect this idea of, like, incredibly rigorous sort of second wave worship, which is what the early stuff struck me as, but, it just didn't do a lot for me on a personal level. And now I'm wondering if... part of the problem was when Clandestine Blaze first got popular, a lot of black metal sounded like it.
Yes, yeah.
And I'm wondering if maybe it's just the time in between now that he's playing in a relatively unpopular style of black metal. Maybe it means more because it stands out more,
As far as I think the style has changed a lot. Like, the idea that Darkthrone is the base of this music is probably still true.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, first, one thing that's changed is the musicianship. This is one of those bands where there aren't drum machines. He actually does everything himself. The drums on this record, they're not fancy, but they're really fast. It is like the other stuff you could hear was sort of deliberately. It was a guy who was, his main thing was being a vocalist and an electronics guy. So it was a guy like, I'm going to do what I can within my limited means, right? Which is respectable. This, he has, the means are greater, but also sonically, it's really developed in certain directions. So I feel like, I think, last time we talked with the Tiradero, we talked about the influence of, you suggested it had Aosoth influence. I said, I don't know I think I hear more DSO on that one. But in terms of your idea that maybe Aosoth has been the most influential or fertile Orthodox band, this really sounds like Aosoth.
And it sounds from one of the guys in DSO, so...
Exactly, yeah. So the guy from... Well, and of course, right? It's like, yeah, he's in DSO, but his version of it's going to sound like Aosoth. And the other band that's super relevant to it is the other band for big kind of on the opposite side of huge sounding, inorganic, glistening toned black metal. You've got Migla.
Yeah, which is very important to this record, and let's remind everyone that Mikko was the person to put Migla on the map. He featured the first ever Migla recordings that were, distributed publicly were on the Crushing the Holy Trinity split, with a few of Mikko's projects, as well as, a few other bands, but some of the earliest, like, drum machine Migla stuff was on that, and Migla's been released on Northern Heritage ever since.
Yeah, and so it's pretty cool. And, I think I was thinking about, I sort of talked about it last time with Odal. I bring it up occasionally as like, one thing that made black metal what it was moving in both directions at once, right? Like, you go higher than death metal and you reach towards these, like, classical melodies or, like, archaic folk roots, and you go lower than death metal by making it retarded. Right, and you do that, and you do that at the same time, and you can produce again and again different kinds of. You can reproduce that maneuver in different specific contexts over and over and over again to produce authentically black metal developments and sound. And so he reached higher. This is a dirty, lo-fi Darkthrone worship project that has reached higher to Aosoth and Migla, and at the same time, he's regressed to the roots of Darkthrone, which I hope you've got a sample for that. Let's go.
Oh, there's some deeply retarded shit on this record, which are some of my favorite parts. Like, there's some...
Yes.
Because actually, like, as abstract as it is a comparison, one thing that I would compare a lot of this record to would be the Vong demo that we covered last year. Vong, for those who aren't familiar, he is a Vietnamese guy who's friends with some other guys that we covered on the show, but he did a very old school, like, Dark Throne and Burzum worship black metal, but with a certain local Vietnamese touch that made it really wonderful. And I think if I could go back, I might actually put that on my best of the year for 2020.
I think you did.
Well, I did it as, like, an honorable mention, but honestly, like, looking back on it, I've listened to it a few times since, and it's like, that's great music. So we're going to go right into that vein. So we're going to listen to a track called Wastelands of Revelation, and here's something I'm curious about, just because I bet you've listened to Clandestine Blaze more recently than I have, since you are the black metal guy, after all. And here's the opening question for this sample, which is, was there this much Celtic frost on previous Clandestine Blaze records?
I can tell you right now, just because I think after the sample I'm just going to start spurging about it. I can tell you, really the last time I heard this band in any kind of detail is, I'm sure, like 2009. But then,
later than me, then.
Yeah, there was frost, like the slow track was kind of frost influenced, but it was frost as filtered through Dark Throne, and it was kind of doomy in a way that is not really what frost was about.
Yeah, no.
This is
not straight Celtic frost.
This is, oh my god, this record is just, oh, yeah, bang your head, motherfuckers.
All right. In that case, let's listen to Wastelands of Revelation.
I've just been listening to High on Fire nonstop, and like... Dang, ding, dang, ding, dang, ding, dang.
So, I mean, was there this much Celtic frost?
No. It was like slow, doomy riffs that, 19-year-old TBMG found boring.
Which I probably would have loved if I listened closer.
Yeah, you would have liked it. You would have liked it, all right. But like, it was fine. But like, if anything, it was just that those riffs sort of stuck out from the rest of the record. And now these parts have been much more seamlessly integrated. And no, they didn't sound like Frost in the way this does. I mean, Yeah, I mean, So what strikes you about this? You've probably got some takes on this before I just drool.
Well, I mean, not much more than that. I mean, obviously, Celtic Frost is an interesting thing to draw influence from, just because Celtic Frost is, in a lot of ways, the primordial soup from which everything descends, in a way. I mean, it is the originating chug band for you.
Yep.
I mean, if you go back to Hellhammer, it's like, it's kind of black metal, and it's kind of death metal, and it's kind of grind, and it's kind of doom, all at the same time. It was before anything was established. And I don't think you can fully recreate that, but goddamn, Miko does a good job of recreating that vibe here. You know, that opening riff on this sample is pure Celtic Frost. You know, it's not too wedded to any sort of style that's been established since, in particular. But then
he really understands how to play it too. I mean,
yeah,
he
really
swaggers into the bends, right? The tone is thinner than a lot of bands that imitate it. If anything, one of the weaknesses of, like, I mean, I remember, I don't own Two Megatherion, but years ago I got Morbid Tales on CD, and I remember being bummed by the sound of that in comparison to Hellhammer, right? Hellhammer, which is just so richly disgusting. Yeah. Morbid Tales has this kind of dry sound, but part of the Celtic Frost sound is, to some degree, that dryness and thinness of the tone.
Absolutely.
Even Hellhammer had thinner tones than a lot of the bands who think you imitate them by sounding really beefy.
Yeah, well, I mean, Celtic Frost's heaviness comes from just the intervals. Like, Procreation of the Wicked is, like, one of the heaviest songs ever, just because they dig in so hard to those simple riffs.
Yeah, well-chosen heavy riff writing, and just the inflections of it. So the rhythm. He really gets the rhythmic aspects of it and how to just rock it out. And, you know, it's like, this whole record, it's like, what I was thinking is, like, right, Mikko Aspa is good at concept, and as a guy who I think, right, starts more as a noisemaker and a vocalist than an instrumentalist, right? Mm-hmm. Concept is his native territory, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but he thinks with his gut.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I
mean?
mean?
He definitely does.
This is the level of, like, you know, you were talking before about how people, on the Hanternoz, you were talking about how people can sometimes artificially separate black metal from heavy metal or whatever. And sure, I think some of the best black metal that's been made is stuff that takes the punk and or sort of reconstructed folk idea of black metal so far it stops being metal. I think that's true. However, there's also been, I think, it's also true that a lot of the best black metal records, even the ones that serve as a model for those very remote styles, also work as metal records, right?
Yeah.
Or like even Hate Forest, which is very not metal in a lot of ways, is still really fucking loud and heavy, right?
But yeah, it's still got that bolt thrower energy.
Exactly. And so, like, this really, you'll hear more throughout this record. It clearly cuts it as black metal in terms of the atmosphere, the seriousness, whatever. But, like, just the sheer grasp of heavy metal kicks and just, like, being drunk in your garage.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That's like, honestly, this is like so much more fun music in a way than I've heard from Clandestine.
It's way more fun than old Clandestine plays. Yeah.
This is fucking party music in a way.
Yeah, and it's also relentlessly dark throughout the whole time. And it has it's both darker and more fun. Like,
Which is the ideal for metal for us, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. So, should I crank it up?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, look, I'm glad Death Metal Guy got one of those Frost samples, because those are some of my favorite parts, but there are some parts on this record that are even more just total, I think you would say catnip for me. This one is called The Human Moth, and like a moth to the flame, if you give me the the massive Joy Division Burzum riff, I'm gonna pick it. So we're just gonna listen to him play this riff for a long time, and you're gonna hear the different things that happens to it.
All right.
Guess what, guys? Ian Curtis is back, and he's coming to your indie show, and he's driving a bulldozer straight through it.
Well, it's funny you said, Joy Division plus Burzum, and I was thinking, as you described that, well, doesn't that just basically make it Killing Joke?
Yeah, I would say Burzum probably sounds more like Joy Division than Killing Joke, but yeah, no, I get what you mean, because Burzum is super dissonant in some parts.
But the burliness is very Killing Joke.
Yeah, no, for sure. The lead, so the opening riff is just the bass line that anchors that. The, dum 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 dum, with the big sort of just minor, big whole step descent, big minor six. That's a Joy Division bass line. That's like, it's a little more. It's a little more Sturm-und-Drang than people associate with Joy Division, but a lot of Joy Division's best songs are like that. I mean, a cliche reference point for that kind of bass line would be Shadow Play. To the center of the city where all roads meet, waiting for you. To the depths of the ocean where our hopes sank, searching for you.
That's kind of a vibe I get off this whole record, which is maybe Miko was listening to a lot of like goth or post-punk.
I think he was.
Yeah, that's incorporated throughout this, and not in the obvious way that maybe like a post-black band would, but just like incorporating those kind of rhythmic and melodic ideas in a very complete way into black metal.
Again, yeah, I always say like Joy Division is misunderstood. People, the indie scene tries to claim Joy Division, but in a lot of ways they were a punk or goth band, or Amoebix. A lot of Amoebix's sound comes from Joy Division. And people said when they heard Joy Division live, Joy Division sounded like a metal band.
It's kind of like when I saw... I always talk about when I saw Alcest live. And it was like, Alcest live features this, like, Godflesh bulldozer bass. So it makes you completely reinterpret what you're hearing. It's like... the essence of the sonic quality, really changes things up. You're not listening to just these delicate melodies anymore. You're listening to this explosive fucking bass presence that these melodies hover over, and it changes your whole interpretation of it.
Yeah, and like Joy Division was very deliberately, the studio albums are deliberately studio as instrument. Like Martin Hannett was like a fifth member, basically, and he gave them this remote sound on purpose. Mm-hmm. And those are brilliant. You can't imitate them, right? But like if you listen to the actual riffs and rhythms, they're like Stooges riffs and like, really like, or like really Germanic sounding Stooges riffs and shit. But so those kinds of super dark sort of, those intervals, that sort of like dark heroic interval, very Joy Division. But a lot of the guitar that immediately comes over it for the default riff, the kind of like dissonant barrel, that's like Killing Joke, right? Killing Joke would write a weirder bass line, but that guitar is like them. The other big post-punk moment is on that part we both loved, where there's that like shift upwards that kind of works like a chorus.
Yeah.
And the lead comes out. Down, 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 down.
That's so cool.
Wow.
Yeah, that's totally like not a metal thing there.
No. So it is, that's like Bernard Sumner lead playing in Joy Division. And, just these carefully selected arpeggio intervals. And again, like, Joy Division is the beginning of dark Dorian scale riffing, basically.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. Push comes to shove, I probably still think Joy Division's better than any black metal band, so he's tapping directly into that source. He understands even how the timing works. But the other cool thing is, at the end when he bends that phrase, metalheads will hear that as metalheads will hear that as frost. Joy Division did that all the time. And the funny thing is, if you look back to old interviews with Celtic Frost, their whole "we're cool guys, we're not just metalheads" thing, they'll say, "We listen to Joy Division and Christian Death."
And honestly, this kind of like brings us back to something we've talked about on the show before, which is, if you're saying those, especially the lead melody there is especially Joy Division or post-punk in general, that means that your whole thesis about Mgła as being like very goth rock and post-punk and those lead riffs, I 100% agree, because that is an exercises in futility lead melody.
Bro, that's exactly the next thing I was going to say. It's like our brains are holding hands, but not in a gay way. Yes, he's like accessing the root material of Mgła, because so much of that basically, if you produced it a little differently, changed some of the notes around, made it all a little bit less wild, that would all kind of scan as Mgła, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And
I was surprised hearing that. Yeah.
Did you catch the end of this song in terms of Mgła?
Oh no, but I caught the. Oh no! Immediately after this sample is a giant Mgła part. It's like it's unbelievable. Like I was surprised you didn't extend the sample into that, because it's like, because the lead takes prominence in the following section, and I remember when I heard it, I was just like, holy shit, Miko is accessing the guys that he made popular, which is also interesting because
he probably also spends time getting drunk with those dudes and talking music, right?
Yeah, probably. I mean, he was the guy who picked up Mgła before they did anything. I think he knew the main guy, very early days, before Mgła was even fully a thing. It was just, hearing that was just so strange. It's like, and then I wonder, does Miko hear that stuff differently,
Yeah, well, it's, Yeah, the end of the song is incredible. And in terms of if you've ever wanted to hear Bigla type riffing, but with dirtier production, there you go. I honestly wrote in the notes originally, I was like, can we just sample the whole song? And then I thought, we gotta sample other things. But just take it from us guys, the end of The Human Moth is in just a insane horns up moment. And if you like the With Hearts Towards None, it's like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so up next is one with a valid life instruction called Disinter the Remains of the Prophets. Let's disinter them.
Let's do it.
Are you sticking your tongue out, bro?
It's so fucking heavy metal in a way that I don't associate with Clandestine Blaze, you know?
Dude, yeah. I mean, dude, that I counted like 3 new types of riffs in that alone.
We gotta go back to recent Clandestine and figure out where this is coming from.
I know a lot of people say this band is like a lot of our friends like this band a lot, and I just figured, okay, everyone's got their favorite cult black metal projects, right? You know,
yeah.
Like you've got your Sargeist, I got my Horna or whatever, right? And we all have our thing, and so, but yeah, if it sounds like this, shit, we have got some catching up to do.
Definitely.
Like, but did you hear like that trill riff at the end? He does the bath, right? That's a Fine Day to Die thing, right?
Well, it's Bathory or it's Slayer. And yeah, that's primordial extreme metal.
And he takes the Bathory does this awesome over that riff. Bathory does this kind of awesome bent, shreddy noise whammy bar abuse, which is cool, but it does it in the context of like Kerry King in it. Whereas on this, Migo's playing notes in that kind of high trilling quality, and there's a distinct riff happening there that's just super dissonant. And he makes it sound like a bleeding ram's horn, like a shofar or something. Like before then, they're just similarly awesome kind of noise riffs made with leads at the beginning of that sample. The speed metal part is sick. He's not cheating on any of the rhythms. You just have this sick cool minor scale descent, and then he goes he hits every single one of those. I just fucking love it. Yeah.
No, I'm definitely, after listening to this, encouraged to check out, the last few Clandestine Blaze records, just so I can inform myself,
Yeah.
Is this shit that everyone knew for the past 5 years, or not?
Yeah. I mean, the irony is that if I had gotten this when I got that first Clandestine Blaze record, I would have, it would have been, the best thing ever. Because that year I was getting into a lot of black metal, but probably if I listened to one thing most, it was probably Death Is This Communion by High on Fire. And, in terms of, understanding black metal as having certain kinds of visceral punk metal kicks, which was really what attracted to me about it then, just the disgusting riffs in early Emperor or whatever.
Yeah.
This just has that in space. I would have immediately, this is what I was looking for.
Oh, I can definitely understand that. So, let's, I'm gonna get to my final sample. And this is a weird case where this is unmistakably modern. This is Miko picking up on ideas from modern black metal bands. Definitely McGlaw as well as other stuff. But something I keep coming back to on this record is 2000s era Marduk. Especially when they did kind of weird slow albums like World Funeral. And everyone's kind of forgotten about shit like that, but that's what we grew up with was, Marduk, the fast black metal band, is doing a slow album now.
That's all we had.
That's what we had, and it was a very special moment. It's ooh, Marduk's being slow now. But I think I think that Miko is incorporating a lot of those ideas on this record, where it's just let's just, in a Celtic Frost sort of sense, let's just play these songs but slower. So, let's go to the second to last track, Unmourned Crimes. And I want to know what you think about it.
Yeah, I certainly hear the. What I hear is kind of I guess a lot of the slower Marduk stuff had an Orthodox color into it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before Orthodox was a thing, they were sort of accidentally accessing a lot of those melodic ideas just by playing way slowed down mayhem riffs.
Wasn't it kind of the same time? When was World Funeral?
I think it was 03. Let's check.
I feel like they were importing I think they imported a lot of ideas when they imported Mortuous.
Yeah, that was 03 that World Funeral was.
Yeah, so let's see. 03 is when Funeral Miss Salvation comes out. What else? What about that fucking who's the flagship? I'm trying to figure out my orthodox chronology.
You're not thinking of Deathspell? Offermod.
1998 is Mysterion, but Watain. Wataine's Rabid Death's Curse is 2000, so I think this is Marduk sort of orthodoxing up.
I could see that.
Yeah, but like, I mean, I think it's also just fair to say they were part of that phenomenon, right? I mean, like, a lot of those bands were listening. The type for what black metal is in those bands is clearly Marduk influenced, and Mortuus was in Marduk, right? So,
yeah.
No, but I hear what you mean. I mean, you get a lot. Neither of our samples had a ton of that. Like, I guess that has the most chiming, dissonant guitar of our samples, but this record has a lot more of it. And it's used very effectively.
Yeah, this record is, like, pretty slow in general.
The fast parts feel very fast, but usually it's anchored in big grooves. Yeah, the slower mid-tempo. Yeah.
I mean, like, if we were talking about this record in isolation, the main influence really would be Celtic Frost, wouldn't it?
Meien Zeit ohne Neid, Freuden, Geiz, wieder Streit, sein Wiederkommen kann uns allen helfen. Auf dem Plan ohne Wahn sieht man Stand, wohlgetan, durch die braune Blümlein bei den Gelben. Durch das Gras sind sie viel schon gedrungen, und der Waldmann nicht bald ungezahlt ist der Schalt, was ward mit dem hier was gelungen. Ich so nicht nach ihr sieht, hätt ich Fried, des ich biet, ob mir jemand kommt daran zu trosten. Ich bin verzeiht, meine Leid unverreiht sind noch breit, ich nehm noch, wer mich davon erloste. Liebesblicken kann ich schicken wilde, es ist mein Klag alle Tag und Getag als ein Zag. Liebesblick, lass mich bei Blickesbilder. Große Not mir entbot, der mir droht auf den Tod, das ist Hildebold von Bärenreute. Irrenfried und der Schmied werden Glied an ein Glied, das sie nicht gemachelt an die Leute. Wer in den mag niemand überhausen, Amelot, Bärengold hat verdollt, dass man sollt über mich gegeben hat zu draußen. Ich kam da an eine Fahr ungewahr zu ihr Schar, ich sah, was die Gatellinge täten. Ihren Gär und ihr Meer gingen schwer hin und her, mit ihr Kapelklingen sahen sie mäten. Da sprach ich, nur wollt ich eines wetten, dass ihr gedroht und ihr Gsnot wurde Blut wie Freud, niemand kommt mit Heereskraft im Wetten. Der kam da, ich nahm wahr, wie er mit der schonen wollte schimpfen. Hoch er sprang an ihrem Dank auf ein Bank, die war's krank, das soll sie ihm preisen für ihr Glimpfen. Dass ihr Bäder Leipzig musste schütten, mir was an euch empfand, dass ihr Gewand sich empfand und ihr kluges Schappell mussten ruhen. Ich klag euch her, diese Meer, seht ihr her, was verfährt, ich soll sie zu diesem Ding gewahren. Ihr nehmt sie kaum an den Saum, an einem Zaum in einem Baum, und den Schaden, das sollt ihr bejahen. Wollt ihr unter schönen Kindern balgen, hin und her, als ein Schwer, als auch er hätte er, besser wär, er hing an einem Galgen. Ich was nachher quert, dass ein Schwert ihm fährt, ein halbes Knie seiner Zähngenossen. Entzemal lief ihn an, kaum entrann er von an, ach, er hätt nimmer mehr kein Weit gestoßen. Wurde ich noch zu Reuental gerochen, ich